Okay, we're live, and we still don't know what we did with Chris. Hopefully we'll get that sorted out. Anyway, welcome to anyone who's watching this or who will watch this at some point in the future. We're hopefully going to have a interesting and robust emergent conversation about agency, and not the kind that you work at, but choosing our actions in this life. Something like that. What did you say the definition was, Marianne? The dictionary definition?
Hang on 1 second. It was the ability to take action or to choose what action to take.
Yeah, the ability to choose what actions to take. So I don't know, Matthew, do you have anything right off the top of your head to start us off with?
Yeah, I think for me, I find it a slightly incomplete definition. I was thinking about this before we started speaking, and I think for me, I understand agency as really the ability to influence the direction, the kind of flow of events, very much towards things we desire and away from things we don't desire. And also, I think there's something on the internal level. There's something experiential as well, so it's towards experiences that we want to experience and away from those that we don't. So there's all these different levels of agency and dimensions of agency. And I think it's really, I understand it very much as a variable thing across a whole load of different dimensions, rather than this idea of having it or not, which is not, for me can get into a bit of a it becomes this weird absolute thing, and it's never true. I don't think complete agency is ever there, nor is complete non-agency.
So yeah, I was sort of thinking along the same lines. I think there's other forces or other variables at play, perhaps. But at some point, like when we're talking about people who are coming out of trauma or something like that, some of the therapy is ways to help them recover their agency, feel like they can make decisions to guide what happens in their own life. So, but I guess one of the things I struggle with is I guess like motivation, or if I'm choosing things in my head and then I actually don't do them, then where's the agency?
But I guess the not doing is kind of a choice as well, isn't it? Like, we have to kind of, every, like on one level, everything's a choice, whether we do it or not. Like there's still some level of choice involved, I guess.
I think it's really important aspect of agency is the not doing. A very overlooked one is it's not. Because for me, one of the interesting things around this is like, what do we mean by choice? Because a lot of my work is concerned with creating good options, not just creating options. And if we have a forced choice, we don't really have any sense of agency, because we don't actually have influence over the outcome. It's that kind of, yes, I can do this, but both options are bad, rather than kind of real, what I think of as real agency, which is more that ability to adopt good options, the ones that are desirable.
And I guess
Go ahead, Marianne.
I guess within any situation, there's always some level of choice, even if the choice is about how we respond to something, like even if it's, or what we choose to make it mean about ourselves or about the world. Like, and this isn't something, like I say this is, and I won't say that I find this particularly easy. Like I'm somebody that can fall into the trap of being like, oh, everything is hard and the world is putting all these obstacles up and da. But actually, it's like, who am I? No matter what the circumstances around us, it's like, who am I choosing to be in the middle of this? Like, what am I choosing to embody in the middle of this? I can't control what anybody else is doing. Everything is connected. Everything is relational. I'm just one piece of the puzzle, if you like. But I can always choose who I want to be in the middle of something. And I can always kind of move towards that, I suppose. And I say that as if it's not like, I think it's like the hardest thing to do, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it brings in a really interesting thing as to what extent do we have agency over ourselves? What how much ability do we have to control our behavior and our experience of the world? I don't believe that's complete. I don't think I've certainly yet to meet anyone for whom that appeared to be the way. And instead we have influence. The experiencing self, the conscious self, has influence over how it and the rest of the us, whatever us is, experiences the world. So again, it's a domain of some agency to me, and I think one of the really important reasons to think about agency at all and to explore the limits of our agency is because it helps us be more effective. It helps us make the choices based on the degrees of freedom that we actually do have available to us, instead of adopting either degrees of freedom that aren't available to us or undershooting and not engaging with the power that we might actually have. And that's true in the self as much as it is everything. I think for me, if it isn't true in the self and the outside world, then there's something funny going on there.
Yeah, earlier you said, Matthew, influence, what we can influence. Yeah, I'm still, I guess I struggle in my own life with the gap between what I sort of intellectually believe I may be able to influence and what actually happens in my life. So at some point there's like I feel like there's a lot of other things going on here, maybe. Part of it's a lot of it's just awareness, though, how much I'm aware that I can actually influence some things. And then I bring in what Marianne's saying about our connection to other people. There is something about the mimetic nature of human beings and how we regulate each other's emotions and all that kind of stuff.
But yeah, well, we can't, I think one of the constraints on agency is awareness, not necessarily conscious awareness, because there are bits of us that are always aware of things that don't ever present it to consciousness. But that if it's outside of our awareness, how can we respond? That feels like a strong limit on agency.
Yeah, well, I love how Tara Brach, the sort of amazing Buddhist mindfulness teacher, she talks about like this. I think it's a Joseph Campbell idea. Like there's this circle. If you think of it like a circle, and everything above the line is what's in your awareness, and like so much of the work is like bringing things up into conscious awareness. Because if we're not aware of what we're not aware of, is probably is kind of running our system. A little bit like all the. And I've trained in a counselling style that's all about family systems. So, I always have that intergenerational perspective of like things that are being handed down, family rules, ways of doing things, beliefs about the world. But it's kind of like the water we swim in. So we don't even know it's there. It's just for us, it's like, this is how the world works, right? And while all of that is in like unconscious, as long as we're not consciously aware of it, it's kind of going to be running the show, and we're going to kind of keep bumping into the same things again and again and again and not even know why. Certainly been my experience, and be like, oh, why does this thing keep happening to me that I don't want to happen? And you're like, oh, okay, it's because like 3 generations ago my grandma thought it was a really good idea to do X, Y, Z, and somehow my operating system hasn't quite updated that actually that doesn't work anymore. And that's just one lens. Of course, there's many other reasons that we might be unaware of things, but like it has to be the first step, doesn't it? Otherwise it's just we don't even know why we're having all these problems.
I think that really pertains to the agency around the self and the understanding of the self. I think, if I remember rightly, it's Joseph Campbell extended Carl Jung's model of the self, and it's Carl Jung's work that kind of underpins a lot of this. And there's a quote around what is it around that if you're not unaware of that the unconscious, if unexplored, appears out externally as fate.
Yes.
Which I've mangled, but it's that kind of intent, and I think it's true. There is this inseparable relationship between us and environment that agency is right in the middle of. The environment acts upon us, and we act upon the environment in a cycle. So there's agency. There's there's multiple cycling agency. This is another reason why I don't like the idea of it as a fixed thing.
Yeah, it's dynamic. Yeah, but there has to be awareness though, doesn't it? Like, because like I think about my grandson who's 2 weeks old today. How much agency is he exercising?
It depends on what you mean by agency and the ability to influence the environment as well. Because, children are very adept at influencing the environment to their survival. It's just their immediate environment is the adults around them. And so this is what I mean, is you can't kind of separate the things out. In a sense, yes, children have low agency, but in another sense, if you're in a family with a very young child, do you grant any other being that level of agency over you and your behavior?
So yeah, if agency is influencing things by our presence or something like that, then maybe unconsciously he actually does have some agency, because everyone else in the house is at his beck and call. Servicing his needs or something like that. So
my dog was grumbling at like 3 a.m. the other morning because he wanted to come up the stairs, and he found it a bit hard because he's only got 3 legs, and he was making so much noise that eventually I came downstairs and carried him up the stairs. So on one level he's a kind of powerless little animal that doesn't speak human language. On another level he gets what he bloody wants, because I don't know how that relates, but I just couldn't resist the opportunity to bring Angelo into the conversation.
Yeah,
he's wandering in. He's heard me talking about him. Yeah, we're talking about him.
Thought he was called. Yeah. I guess one of the reasons I wanted to do this conversation was I was curious about if we can, through awareness or self-development or mindfulness or journaling or talking to our counselor or whatever, if we can increase, I don't know if I want to say increase our agency, but increase our understanding of the agency that we already have. Can we feel like we can control our lives more than we do? Can we influence the things that happen around us at a level higher than the level that we're at now? Is that possible? I'm assuming it is, but that's why I wanted to have this conversation, is maybe how do we look at that? How do we do that? How do we think about doing that?
I just want to ask a question before we get into too much. And in that question, there's an assumption that influence and control vary together.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, essentially, if one goes up, the other goes up. I'm not convinced.
Yeah, no, I think our previous conversation we talked about that. That we used the gardening. I'm a gardener of my life metaphor, and there's a lot of things going on in the garden, things growing or whatever over time that I have absolutely no control over.
And for me, I think agency actually covers both influence and control. Perhaps it is the word that combines both, but I think it's important to note that they are different things.
Yeah, that's a good distinction.
Yeah. I agree. And Matthew, earlier you talked about power as well, and I was kind of curious about, oh yeah, so influence, control, power, how all these kind of agency, how all these things kind of play together, and they're not the same, but I guess they all have slightly different, nuances to them. Yeah.
Influence for me often aligns with some things that tend to be called soft power, and control with things that tend to be called hard power.
Hard. Dictatorship versus
Yeah. And I think that gets exactly to the root of what we mean by agency. How control and influence don't necessarily vary together. If you think about the most strict dictatorships in the world, they have an awful lot of control over their local sphere, but they have very little influence globally. And so it's a really interesting relationship there. But equally, you can't be completely open. The most open societies kind of often hit the edges of this and struggle with this, and so it's not that either one is good or bad. It's a question about the situation and your responses to them and your particular resources and interest in that. We have elements of both at each time. They both make up agency.
Do you think that? Because I feel like control is just an illusion, isn't it? Like, do I have control over, what do I have control over in my life? Like, I'm not sure. Like, I make choices and I influence what I think and feel and believe about the world, and then that in turn changes my experience of the world, and I hope I influence other people, hopefully for the better. But like, what am I in control of? Or like, are we ever really in control of anything? Like, I'm not sure we are, because everything is relational, and we can't we certainly can't like, we might have the illusion of control of other people, like a dictatorship, but really, dictatorships fall at a certain point. People decide, oh well, we're not going to be ruled by you anymore, so thank you very much, we're going to take our power back. Like, I don't know. I asked this as a question. It's my own inquiry in a way. Like, I want to be in control, because then I feel safer, and then I feel I think I feel safer. But yeah, is it even possible?
I think for me, control is another variable state. The extent to which it's a question of the extent to which we can control the outcome, which we can constrain a specific range of outcomes.
We can influence an outcome, can't we? We can't.
Yeah, influence is more. But I tend to think of influence as around the range. Control is the constraint. And influence is the kind of direction that is moving it in what we see as a positive direction, without constraining the final outcomes specifically.
Yeah, just reading Chris's thing. I like the idea of not being in control. It doesn't stop me seeking it. Shedding control is absolution of responsibility, which feels thrilling. Yeah. It's certainly quite tiring to feel like you have to be in control of everything. It's certainly quite a weight to carry on your shoulders, isn't it? If you feel like control is the ultimate idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I there's the other side of that though, and the fear of not being in control, I think, really affects a lot of people. Feeling like things are happening outside of their control and beyond their ability even to influence things, fate or things happening to them, I think is a great fear of a lot of people.
I do wonder, whether fear of control, how much it's a direct fear and how much it's a fear of what happens when we lose control. It's one of those. Yeah, well, for me, it's an open question. It's like, what is the thing behind the loss of control? What do we assume will happen if we lose control? And I think that's variable. And there's specific outcomes and there's general stuff. But what's the and I think one of the big kind of almost existential fears on this in this space is irrecoverability of a situation. You know, essentially that if you let go and then something happens, you can never regain that once it's gone. And I think that is that kind of, and you know, there is a genuine element to that, in the sense that when we're dealing with anything in a complex system, they work one way. You can't trivially unwind them like you can with a kind of mechanical system. They don't go backwards in quite the same way. And so there is, you know, we do have some degree of care in this. You know, this is the flip side of power, really. I think, you know, is the care that it implies. The agency implies some degree of really being responsible is a funny word, but maybe responsible is the combination of agency and care.
Agency and care. So I think we may have managed to get Chris up here.
I appear to be here. Am I? I'm not sure.
I
am here.
You're here.
I have agency.
Amazing.
Either this is a joint hallucination, or you're actually on the broadcast.
That's lovely. I'm glad responsibility is thrown into it. Well, can you elaborate, Matthew, on what you were saying there?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, this is the always the other side of power, and it relates to the fact that we are inseparably part of everything that we act upon. You know, there is always, we can't fully separate. We're partially separate, and depending again on the exact situation, but everything that we do has kind of consequences that play out for us and the things that we're connected to, and therefore have a stake in and an interest in. So I think from my perspective, that idea of care, of making it, you know, engaging with the thing and engaging with our power, but doing so with an awareness of the good and the bad that can come with that, is how we can deploy. I mean, in some ways it's about using our agency to optimize long term versus agency in the short term. You know, you can take a lot of agency, you can take very strong action, but if that results in, say, you going bankrupt or you going to prison, that reduces your agency in the long run.
Or starting global nuclear war.
Yeah. Yeah. Which again is I think, you know, when you're talking about someone so very powerful as the leaders of large countries, this is directly pertains to that. Yeah, absolutely. And that would reduce, you know, it's like, it feels like there's this thinking mistake that's like, well, if I get all of this, I'll be safe. If I can kind of, but it's like, if I get all the money, then I'll be able to buy anything. But if you think about it, you won't, because you'll be the only one. No one else will care about money, and they'll all be doing something else, and your money will be worthless because you'll just be the one with all of these bits of paper that mean nothing to anyone else.
Yeah. So there's a story behind that. Yeah.
And it feels the same with the war thing. You know, it's like, when we do this, we'll be safe. Well, actually, no, we'll be there'll be a handful of us surviving, and and actually our agency and our outcomes will be significantly more constrained.
Yeah, I'm sorry I brought that into it. I was hoping to stay more on the personal level.
There is something about safety, though, and again, like, I think maybe Chris speaks a bit to what you were saying about, like, just that sense of is it the fear of what will happen if we lose control, and, you know, that kind of grasping for, you know, for power, let's say, or control is our way of trying to to stay safe in the world. It's our kind of way of like, if I'm in control of this, then, you know, I can't, you know, nothing will surprise me, or I won't be harmed, or this won't happen. And that's not true. But again, I feel like that's kind of quite a common thinking mistake versus like the kind of surrender. Like surrender is a word that I really struggle. Like surrender and acceptance, like, are these two very core spiritual concepts, both of which I really have to kind of like, I find them quite hard. Like they're not particularly easy, which is that sense of like, yes, I have agency, and also I'm going to go with the flow, and I'm going to trust that the flow of life will take me where I need to go, and I'm going to do my bit, and I'm going to, you know, paddle the oars in the boat, you know, but the river's going to take me where it takes me. And actually that there's no safety in me knowing all the answers. I don't know.
Well, I think in the spiritual realm, there's also the underlying thing of not being attached to outcomes. You know, exercising agency or control as far as we are able to, but not being, not having a fear that things other than what we wish will happen. You know, not expecting that it's going to result in the outcome that we most desire.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, totally.
Or that we can even predict. Sorry.
No, go on.
I was going to say, or that we can even predict what that is. There's a lot of research to suggest that humans are pretty bad at predicting what they're going to like.
Super bad.
Which is a strange, you know, it's so challenging to just the conventional way of thinking about, you know, but it's not a trivial problem to identify what we want.
Right.
We'd be out of work if it was, wouldn't we?
Exactly. I mean, that's a good point. I think all four of us on some level work with, at least to some degree, that you know, the helping people identify what they do want. And I think for me and my work, particularly if you experience the world differently, you're aware of different things, and you have different capabilities to act in the world, that does throw up. It's incredibly hard to really, there isn't your wants won't be met kind of off the shelf, as it were. It requires something else.
Yeah, I think
I can't
for me,
reconcile ethics here of agency. Sorry, Craig.
No, go ahead, Chris. I missed the first part of what you said.
I can't reconcile the ethics of agency here, because it sounds like we're saying that it's all or nothing with agency. Once we get the agency, we want more of it, because there's no such thing as enough. We just want the power. We want more. We want more. There's the Putin mindset, and also there's this thing about no, that's enough. That's enough. That's a frustrating idea in itself, isn't it? This idea that we'll always want more.
Yeah, I was going to go a similar direction, only just to say that the other thing with wants, identifying our wants and trying to control things so that we get them, a lot of people also wind up with a very strong either or. Either I do this thing and I get that outcome, or not. And there's not, people have a hard time seeing other possible ways of addressing needs that they have or wants, entertaining different paths to get there, which I think is similar to what you're talking about.
And different better outcomes that crop up along the way as well.
Yeah,
that's the other thing.
You've just reminded me, Craig. Yeah, that's the essence of the problem that I face, is that we can't have enough agency, and it always leads to needing more. And also, the idea that agency will bring us what we want is also flawed, because it can't. You know, like you were saying, unintended consequences. That's humanity's want, isn't it? We think we want the thing, we get the power, but other stuff happens that we didn't intend. So why are we seeking more of it? That's what I can't reconcile.
I think for me,
how many people actually get what they think they want and find out that it doesn't actually satisfy what they set out to get?
It's one of those apocryphal curses, isn't it? You know, the curses that sound like compliments. May you get what you want. May you come to the attention of people in authority. Yeah, they're all like, you know, yeah. And I think there is I think there is a justice in the sense of that we get what we, that when we do get what we want, if the intent is positive, it tends to be a positive experience. If the intent is selfish and closed off and constricted, it tends to work out negative. I think that's, there's so much myth and story where that's a thing. There's so much. It's like the monkey's paw, or I'm trying to think. There's but that idea of like, really, I think for me it's very related to this idea of hard power and constrained outcomes. In a specific controlled domain, agency and power are zero-sum things. If I have some, you don't have some. And it becomes essentially who can secure the most wins. The difficulty is that we don't really exist in a constrained domain. They're constructed in our head, in sometimes in society as well, and they're essentially there, but they don't reflect the reality. We're much less. There isn't an underlying constraint to the way everything works. In a meaningful sense for people, there may be on a physical level, but we haven't discovered it yet. Because we're still going at both ends in physics, let alone everything else. There's more small stuff and more big stuff apparently. So there's no constraint we're aware of, at least yet. And so when we understand in these terms of, okay, well, it is constrained, we're making a mistake. We're limiting our agency. We're choosing power over influence. We're essentially optimizing in a small domain at the expense of the wider. Because for me, I think the really interesting thing is agency in the bigger picture is joint. We share agency. That's why we collaborate. That's why we work together. It's why we have a conversation rather than just speaking.
So do you think then the agency is kind of like other things that are really useful, like generosity and love and compassion, things like that? Do they increase with their use, with their sharing? If we're sharing our agency towards some common purpose, is the actual agency increasing? I not that I think we can measure agency necessarily, but if it's not zero sum, then
I believe so. And I think this is a lot of the work of it. The kindness, the gender, that those are all ways of sharing a resource. If we see agency as a resource, as an internal psychological resource, perhaps, then we can use it in different ways. We can share it in a loving way, or we can share it in an unloving way. And if we share it in a loving way, it opens up the possibility for everyone. It's not lost, it's not spent. Whereas if we kind of constrain it and limit it, then it does become... Well, the thing about zero sum is that nothing is perfect. And therefore, zero sum tends to mean negative sum, because there are always losses. So if when we say zero sum, what we really mean is negative sum, unless everything is perfect.
Yeah, all other things being equal, as we say in research, which is never true.
Yes, as the old physics joke goes, if you assume that the chicken is a sphere traveling through a vacuum, the idea that we are dealing with these edges that we were talking about and this uncertainty is a core part of how we use our agency skillfully or unskillfully.
I've never thought of agency as a concept beyond the atomized individual, which probably tells you I'm a product of the neoliberalism system in which I live, that I've always assumed it would just be a thing on my part and actualizing myself in an environment. I've never thought of agency as a shared cooperative resource.
We're
But
not
there's something
taught
about.
to. Sorry.
I guess there's something about like if one person steps into their full power, into their full light, then it kind of gives permission for others to do the same, and that's where it's kind of not. Yeah, I guess like it's that abundance, not scarcity mindset. Like if we're like, okay, there's a limited pot of power and control, and we're all fighting for. I think this is maybe, to your point, Matthew, like, you know, then we're always going to feel like a loser or a winner, or a, you know, we're going to win and then we'll lose. Like, but if we can kind of, if it's that sense of like, I'm going to fully step into my own sense of agency, my own sense of power, I'm going to light up my bit of the world in whatever way I can do, then that illuminates the ways for others. And actually it does create more. It has a momentum to it. My action has a knock-on effect on this thing that I, you know, and I can't possibly, like unintended consequences in a good way, hopefully, you know, I can't possibly know what will come out of this thing. All I can do is keep stepping into my sense of positive agency, the positive intentions I want to make in the world, and do my best, you know. And that's where it is. Like it's community,
It
it's
feels like we're
relation.
veering away. I think I subscribe to that, Marianne, but part of me is just like going, that sounds like trickle down economics. You know, the idea that individuals will act in self-interest and that will contribute to the greater good. And I'm not sure that's ever happened or will happen.
Well, I guess whether it's self-interest or like,
know.
I guess, so with my purpose guide hat on, I guess like the idea of purpose is purpose beyond self. So yes, like it's good to come have a great life and enjoy it and have fun. But like, you know, we're all, you know, in my belief system, it's like, you know, we're all born with a purpose that is like a purpose beyond self. So when we're acting in purpose beyond self, and hopefully like we, you know, we enjoy it as well, we're not doing it just for other people, then I guess that's where you kind of get that. Because I agree. If my only focus is like, how can I, you know, have the most, I don't know, like earthly pleasure, then I may or may not be being useful to anyone else. But if I'm like, okay, what's the purpose that lights me up and has a use beyond my little narrow frame of reference, then actually I probably can have quite a lot of impact and influence.
Yeah, I think because we're relational social beings, our joy is going to increase if we are, you know, directing our agency towards something bigger than just ourselves, including others. Even if we're not necessarily consciously choosing who we're including and why, if we're trying to move the whole thing towards a better reality, then we're going to have more joy, satisfaction, etc. in ourselves than if we were just pursuing it for our own, which tends, I think, gets into what Matthew was saying. It tends to be short term. If I'm just doing something for my own satisfaction or whatever, it tends to be very short term and tends to have negative consequences in the long term. But if I'm shooting for positive in the long term, it's probably going to have some satisfaction in the short term, even if there's some difficulties.
Yeah, in terms of the ability to act, I think of there being a very big difference between power over and power with. And we often talk about, essentially, we very rarely talk about power with and how to create that. We very often talk about power over. So it tends to mean that our agency, our power is we tend to think of it entirely in the terms of constraint. And that serves a certain sort of discourse and a certain sort of person. But I don't think it's very helpful in the long run. And I think there is, there is a real, we talked about fear of loss of control. I think there's a real fear of power as well. We have a fear of our own capability very often, and of our collective and individual capability, but particularly our collective capability.
I've observed the same thing. I often think it's more the fear of the consequences of that capability, as in executing it, doing something, acting on it, what that will then invite in.
I think it's
more loss of control.
Or being culpable I think, if we do, it's like, if you do have the power, you have to, you become responsible in the sense that you can respond. And but that then implies that you choose one path, and that implies that you choose not another path, and that there is responsibility there. It opens up the scope for sins of commission instead of sins of omission.
Yeah, I guess in trying to think in my mind, I'm trying to think of examples, and I'm not going to name an example, but it seems to me that another whole part of this is when we come up against systems and boundaries set by society or others or powers that be or whatever, that don't allow us to continue going in the direction, either individually or collectively, that we're trying to agency towards.
Sorry, I just we had a quick question in the chat about sins of commission and sins of omission. I'll just do my best to explain. So we tend to treat allowing something to happen through action versus allowing something to happen through inaction quite differently. So this is related to something that's tested in psychology, classically in psychology, by something called the trolley problem, which is, is essentially, what's the difference between allowing people to come to harm through direct, deliberate action versus allowing people to come to harm through inaction? And that we actually weigh the balance is not even for most people. We prefer, in a sense, we'll cause more harm through inaction than we will through action. Or most people have that preference by quite a strong margin, 3 or 4 to 1 usually.
And most of the things we have active and defined ways of punishing are sins of commission.
Yeah.
Although sins of omission do come up in negligence and things like that, but we tend to think that bad is what you do to other people, not what you fail to do.
So that's commission. Yeah, exactly. Commission as taking positive action, whatever that is a problem that causes a problem, that causes harm, as opposed to not taking any action when you could have done that causes harm.
That makes me think of this. So when I decided to quit my job like 4 or 5 years ago, and it was quite quite a scary thing. There was this really helpful, like, stoic framework of like, okay, well, look at what are the worst case scenarios. How could you overcome them if they came up? But like, one of the core questions was like, what is the cost of not taking action? Because it often feels like, you're going along on your path, you're going, and doing something different feels like the scary thing, and just allowing things to keep rolling feels like the quote unquote safe thing. But actually, what is the cost of inaction? And I think it's hard, isn't it, to kind of, it can be hard to keep that in mind. But actually, I think that was what tipped me into like, do you know what, I'm going to quit my job without actually knowing exactly what's going to come next, because I know that the cost of not doing something different is higher than the risk involved in setting up something new. It worked out like incredibly well. But I didn't know it was going to work out really well. It's really scary.
The funny thing is we don't have anything to test against either way, actually. We kind of assume this continuance, that things will carry on as they are, but we also, on an intellectual level, know that that's not the case. And things change.
Yeah.
So actually, it's a, maybe that's the illusion when we say illusion of control, is it essentially that we know what the rules are and then we know they're going to stay the same, rather than, because you don't have any mode of comparison either way. And again, this is a complexity thing. You couldn't rerun it. You'd have to rewind the whole of time to be able to. So you can't know in a deterministic way either way. But it just feels more like we do know if we act somehow.
Yeah, I think awareness, just awareness, is super important in this conversation, because our minds by default are designed to find patterns, to look for things that are similar, and to make assumptions, even though we're super bad at it, to make assumptions that if that happens, then this is going to happen. It's a survival instinct that our brains do automatically. So awareness brings in, trying to be aware that that process is going on, and trying to help ourselves to see that, help ourselves to understand. Yeah, we know intellectually that that's almost never the case, that something happens. I mean, if you drive your car into a tree 2 times in a row, probably similar things are going to happen. But yeah, there's a lot of our assumptions are ill-founded, but our brains are doing that automatically if we're not bringing awareness into it.
Yeah, well, it's awareness of what do we believe about the world? Like, unless we know that, what do I believe about the world? What do I believe about myself? Like, because every belief I have will influence, my actions, So for example, I don't know, if my belief about the world is like, it's the only way to be financially safe is to stay in a steady job, then like, I'm not going to be able to quit a job even if it's really not serving me. Whereas if my belief about the world is like, things happen, life flows and things will, abundance, things will come, then I'm going to have quite a different approach to it. And neither's wrong. Like, it's not like one belief is right or wrong. But if I don't know that that's my operating model, then I'm going to really struggle to make good choices for myself.
And I think it's even more tricky, because what we believe affects what we perceive. And that is there's a feedback loop there. And so, we were talking about agency and perception near the beginning, and that we need to be able to perceive something for it to fall into our scope of agency. But if we have a very strong fixed belief about something, we'll filter everything out that doesn't fit with that belief. And that's not a bug, really. That's how we filter the huge amount of information that's passing through us all the time. It's like, okay, well, this is useful and this isn't useful. We need that filtering, but we also need to be able to. And for me, when we're talking about awareness, and certainly that kind of perhaps reflective capacity, as opposed to awareness in the moment, though the two seem to be very closely related. But when we're talking about the ability to reflect, we're talking about the ability to look at those filters and say, are they appropriate? Did they serve us? Do they serve us? Should they be tweaked? Would it be helpful if I changed this up a bit? And that feels like a part of, and that for me is when we're talking about agency in acting upon ourselves. That's the kind of agency we have over our beliefs, because we can't directly change beliefs. That doesn't actually work. We can't just replace a belief. You might say, I would like to believe this, but you can't, through wanting to believe a certain thing, actually make yourself believe it just like that.
Yeah, if we could change our beliefs really easily, we wouldn't have to have conversations like this.
Exactly.
And most of the work the 4 of us do wouldn't really probably be necessary if our beliefs were easy to change. Yeah.
But beliefs change presumably through the commissioning, through the exerting agency, right? Because that gives us feedback and data to come back to then.
Yeah, our beliefs are going to ebb and flow as things go on, whether or not we are aware of them doing so.
I would always encourage agency, even if it's not clear or evident what the right way forward is, because I find that to get someone out of that paralysis, it's just do something, do anything, however imperfect it is, that will give you something new, some new data to work on in some way.
It feels related to that zone of kind of perfect control that we think we fully understand, the space where we feel that we have perfect control, and stepping outside of that, so that we do get new data, and we can have new experiences, and moving outside of the stuff that we do that is entirely familiar and entirely predictable. I think for me there's a difficult flip side of this, is that my natural preference is for the kind of uncertain and the strange and the weird, and actually my space of kind of uncertainty is something that's predictable and comfortable. So because there's this relationship between unfamiliarity and it is a deeply personal thing. So yeah, and that's the other side of it. We can become familiar, comfortable with discomfort, and that's just as problematic as being too familiar and comfortable with comfort.
I guess it's knowing what serves us, knowing what, because aspects of that will be helpful and aspects won't be. If you grow up in chaos, and chaos is the water you swim in as a child, and so chaos feels familiar, you keep creating chaos, and at a certain point you might be like, oh, okay, well, it's great that I can really respond and adapt to different situations. That's a positive of this, but how can I create a different experience and create the new neural pathways that associate calm with being how things are, rather than constantly trying to create more chaos, which I would love to say is a completely theoretical example. Let's pretend it is.
Yeah, and I think for me that a lot of agency is simply that there are so many opportunities, so many ways of creating these things, one way or the other, that pass through all the time. We have so many options, so many different ways of behaving, and it is working in a way that our beliefs and our skills allow us to be able to connect with the good ones, with the ones that we want, the ones that are positive sum, the ones that help us and other people at the same time, and just being able to find those more reliably, attuned to those. But that's a huge amount, I say that very glibly, but it's a huge amount of work. It's a life's work, perhaps.
I think it may vary for different people, but at some point, all of the things we're talking about are pretty difficult to work out by ourselves, sort of in vacuum. I feel like conversations, our relationships with other people are super important for us navigating our own agency and considering these things.
I completely agree. And I'd also say that the other side is true, that solitude, which is, when I say solitude, I mean a conversation with some aspect of oneself.
Yeah. Community with yourself. Yeah. Conversation with yourself.
Yeah. As those, and whatever situation gives rise to that, and that the two go hand in hand.
Yeah.
So have we nailed it? I feel like we've cracked it.
Yeah. It's all the world problems are all
solved, fixed, done. Yeah, next.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, the agency of the internet has rendered Chris unhere.
I think he's so wise. The universe is like, we're not ready for Chris's wisdom.
Not ready. Yeah, can't cope.
Spread. It's just going to create so much, so much change that it's shutting him down.
Yeah. I guess that I don't know why, but in the back of my mind, I keep thinking about 12-step programs, because part of what brings you into 12-step programs when you're in some kind of addiction or something is admitting to yourself that you are not able to have agency over this thing, that has felt like it's been controlling you. But what's interesting to me is in the working of that out, it's in a context of a community or relationships with other people. And you find agency to go in the direction you want to go in that context. It's really difficult to do on your own. And I also think of people who do counseling for people who have gone through trauma, especially sexual trauma. And a lot of what needs to happen as early on as possible is the person who has experienced the trauma feeling like they have agency, feeling like they are able to make decisions about their own body and their own surroundings and act on those. As part of a definition of trauma might even say a person feeling like agency has been ripped from them. And I think addiction actually is similar in some ways. People feel like they don't have agency over something that's destroying them.
I think, if anything, the challenge with addiction is that feeling like you are in control of something, or that you want to be in control of something, and almost being surprised you can't be in control of it. Which is why, step one is like, I am powerless over whatever the addiction is. Like, is admitting that to yourself. Like, I think that addiction is a disease of control, and believing that you're fully in control of everything, and that you'll regain control of whatever your addictive pattern or substance might be. So it's kind of interesting. Yeah, I think the power of admitting powerlessness is actually quite huge. But then I think it is. But then and that's like, it's the classic serenity prayer: grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I mean, that's it in a nutshell, isn't it? But I think it's a life's work. What is what can't I change? What can I change? Like, and discerning is sort of a life's work in a way. So like. That's the power of that, I think, for me. Yeah.
For me,
so I think one thing I'm taking away from this conversation is that is reminding myself that there's all sorts of different outcomes. Though it can be an experiment, and there's not necessarily one particular outcome that is going to solve all of my problems or whatever. What were you going to say, Matthew?
I was going to say, I think for me, a lot of this is around actually a closer relationship with how we experience things, and becoming, allowing ourselves the full breadth of experience. In many ways, both trauma and addiction are ways of avoiding experiencing. And I want to say that both are absolutely legitimate responses to incredibly difficult circumstances. And that there's no... that very often we respond with the tools that we have, the resources that we have at any time. And for many people, certainly in the case of compulsive behavior, is actually, given the resources and the knowledge and everything available, following that compulsive behavior is the least bad option. But the work is then the shift to creating good options instead. And I think for me, the idea that we remain, whilst the 12-step program is incredibly helpful and has helped millions of people. However, for me, I think in and of itself, it prevents the final step of agency, which is allowing ourselves to experience, and allowing opening up again on those outcomes, and being able to say, yes, I have the skills now, I have the resources now to be able to allow that this is a possibility. This is within the realm of possible outcomes, but it's one that I believe I have the skill and the capability and the awareness and the knowledge to avoid, rather than limiting and saying it is not going to happen and I will put hard limits on preventing it from happening. And for me, that is that move from control, which we kind of have to get over a small domain, and then outwards into agency, is the root of the work, the expansive work, and the growing outwards. And that's true whether we're talking about trauma, where we control an environment and say, I won't go out I won't put myself in this situation, and then slowly edge into the situation where you kind of allow and say, okay, yes, this is a possibility, but I now believe I have the resources to handle it.
Yeah.
And that work is the next step onwards. So yeah, and I think for me that, when we're talking about really increasing agency, if we are desirous to increase our agency, then attending to that side of things, because it is the co-agency, it's the power with. That's where I would like to look, and I would like others to look as well.
Yeah. Underlying that, I think, is accepting that none of this is either or, black or white. That there's levels and complexity and nuance and subtlety in all of what we're talking about, and also kind of committing to the experience and committing to be a learner, committing to try to learn from, see what we can learn from what we experience and how things go, is also an important part of that work, it seems like. Because if you're not coming to it from a seeking to learn, seeking to grow, then it's going to be hard to make any changes. Well, we are on an hour here. Probably we could continue our conversation. It's unfortunate that we didn't get Chris fully in, but it was good having Matthew, Marianne, Chris. Good having you here, and Yvonne in the chat. That was great. This has been fun. I am going to post here where people can get more of you guys if they want to. This is Matthew, and you guys are still here, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for doing all the for doing some nice hard promo there at the end.
Well, you're really interesting people, so people might want to find out where they can get more of you.
And thank you for framing and holding such an interesting conversation. I think it's talking about these things, particularly in these terms, in the sense of how it relates to us as on a personal level and our work, is a bit too, for me, it's a bit too, it's all philosophy or religion, and it's kind of bundled off into that in quite a safe way that doesn't change anything, because some of this is quite radical and challenging, and I really like that. So thank you for giving us the space to share it and explore it.
Yeah, it's hard to know how to put the word out, because if just saying on LinkedIn or Facebook or something, let's talk about agency. I think most people are not thinking that's going to be very helpful, but yeah, I think these conversations are super helpful. I feel like if we continue having conversations like this, I need to find a better way, or we need to find a better way to tell people that they would benefit from joining in.
And we get better by doing it and trying it. The right people show up, and it happens at the right time.
Okay, well, I wish you well in the rest of your days. Thank you for coming to this, and all of you who were here today and who will watch this in the future. I thank you for thinking about these things, and there are some links there for if you want to get in touch with or see what the people who participated are doing. You can do that, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. Thanks, everybody.
And I have no idea how to stop this. Oh, here we go. Okay. Okay. Ta-ta for now.